This is the Convene podcast. My name is Maggie, digital media editor. This episode is brought to you by Visit Phoenix. With another post-pandemic year under their belts, business event organizer respondents to this year's meetings market survey seem to be on a steadier ground, dealing with less uncertainty, but still struggling with pressing challenges largely outside of their control. Their survey responses reflect an acceptance of difficult market conditions, cautious optimism about the future, and above all, a sense of resilience. Resignation and Resilience. Written and read by Michelle Russell, Editor-in-Chief at Convene. Followed by a discussion with Michelle on what stood out from the meetings market survey.
The challenges highlighted by last year's meetings market survey respondents, unfortunately, haven't gone away. Some, like rising costs and budgetary constraints, have become more acute, piling more pressures on an already stressful job. Planners have long occupied top spots on several most stressful jobs lists, and the role was included on job site Indeed's most recent list this year. Event planners are responsible for organizing and supervising every aspect of an event according to Indeed's job description, adding that planners deliver events with strict deadlines and budgets. They also have to oversee and direct a large number of activities. But those big responsibilities have long been table stakes for event organizers. Indeed's description just scratches the surface, lacking additional post-pandemic challenges like skyrocketing F&B and AV expenses, and working with smaller staffs internally and externally that often haven't returned to pre-pandemic levels. On top of that, there's the need to deliver on participants' growing expectations for experiential and memorable events. In sum, heightened expectations, higher costs, and budgets that don't match up. While this year's event organizer respondents expressed frustration that these challenges persist ever since the world got back to business after the COVID shutdown, there is also something of a sense of resignation or acceptance of certain realities and a determination to carry on, perhaps the result of having weathered the largest disruption the events industry has ever had to face. Showing resolve. In the metric most often associated with success, we have bounced back. Nearly half of event planner respondents said that attendance at their largest in-person meeting in 2024 exceeded participation levels prior to the pandemic, with only 1 in 5 indicating attendance has decreased. This is an improvement over last year, when only 40% said their 2023 attendance had grown beyond pre-pandemic levels, and nearly 3 out of 10 said it was lower. But last year's survey respondents were more optimistic about their budgets increasing in 2024 to keep pace with rising costs and attendee expectations. 64% thought they would have bigger budgets to work with. Less than half of this year's respondents anticipate an increase in 2025. Perhaps that reflects that planners are more realistic about, or more used to, working with flat budgets and mounting costs. Nearly 2 out of 5 respondents, 39%, expect their budgets to stay the same in 2025, compared to only 1/4 of planners in last year's survey. When it comes to taking measures to offset expenses, planners' responses demonstrate their resourcefulness. 3 out of 5 planners are sharpening their pencils and becoming more skilled negotiators. 55% are beefing up sponsorship opportunities, and 53% are judiciously cutting out event elements that carry an expense but don't deliver a return on investment. Only around half have shifted costs over to attendees by raising registration fees. Planet and people. Yet dealing with these harsh financial realities hasn't forced event organizers to neglect the larger responsibilities of doing better for their audiences and the environment. At a time when corporations are scaling back on their DEI initiatives, planners are doubling down on inclusion, diversity, and accessibility. The majority, 66%, of respondents have prioritized DEI initiatives at their events, including being intentional about hiring diverse suppliers, fine-tuning codes of conduct, choosing more diverse speakers and panelists, and engaging DEI committees to ensure that they are welcoming and inclusive to all. And while other industry surveys suggest that, given their other challenges, planners are making sustainability less of a priority, responses to this year's Meetings Market Survey indicate otherwise. Nearly double, 60% versus 31% in last year's survey, are including sustainability requirements in their RFPs. Now, one could argue that planners are relegating environmental responsibility to their suppliers, but another data point shows that they are also holding themselves accountable for their footprint. 42% have increased sustainability reporting internally and/or to attendees versus 27% last year. Are planners more or less anxious about the future? It's a tough call. Responses were mixed. Some are enthused about the opportunities that Gen AI brings to their roles and industry overall, and others express concern over its explosive growth and lack of oversight. Many planners said they are worried about the impact that big events, the U.S. election, wars, inflation, and climate change, to name a few, will have on their own events, the industry, and society. One planner captured why more than half of respondents said they were both excited and worried about what lies ahead. The unknown is exciting, but scary.
We heard the first part of the Meetings Market Survey, Michelle, that you wrote and introduced the survey in our November issue. And I was hoping that the two of us can talk a bit more about the rest of the survey and the data a bit more to present it to our listeners in a way that makes a bit more sense for listening to it rather than reading it. And I wanted to start with the profile of our respondents. So this year we had a total of 255 event professionals that responded to our questionnaire. And we had 40% coming from associations. Most of them were North American based, and their organizations were international in scope. And most of our respondents also come from organizations that employ between 1 and 20 people. The titles of those that responded were mostly director and manager. There were event planners, and I highlighted because we also asked if there were suppliers or event marketers. And many of them, most of them actually organize between 21 to 50 meetings a year. In terms of how many years of meeting management experience they have, close to half of respondents actually have more than 20 years of experience, and their average age is 48, mostly Caucasian or white female respondents, which is usually what our respondent profile looks like, right?
Yes, that's usually the case. Definitely mostly female, so that's right in line. Tends more toward more experienced planners at the, as you said, at the manager director role level. So yeah, this is pretty much in keeping with past surveys. I would say, we were both disappointed that we didn't have more responses, but I have found that it is really difficult to get people to commit to this survey just because it is pretty detailed. We do ask for budgetary information, year over year kind of comparison. So it's a little bit of a commitment. And I just think people are kind of surveyed out. So there is survey fatigue. But we got to 250, 255. So that's good. I think that's a good size sample. Where we do kind of struggle is getting more of an international response. We still rely heavily on North American planners, but I think that's just part of, our evolution as an international association. We're still very much North American based, which is fine. Neil Brownlee is the incoming chair of the PCMA Foundation and chair of the board. And he's the first international chair that PCMA has ever had. And he keeps saying that we're based in North America and we're going to be more international. It's not like, just to make sure everybody understands that they're not switching focus away from North America. It's still going to be where we have been, plus more of an international community participating with PCMA. So that's kind of a long-winded explanation. I always like to ask how people are feeling, and we started asking this question during the pandemic because I thought it's so important for people to recognize the large range of feelings all of us were having, whether it was despair or frustration or holding on to some hope, or just the fact that it went on for very long and how people were coping with not being able to do their job and have face-to-face events and not being able to do all the social activities that we're all used to doing. So that was the question we always led with, and we continue to ask that question. And it really is a mix now. You hear a lot of the same themes repeated, which is that planners often feel like they are invisible in their organizations, that their work is not understood. And that's a little surprising given that we have such a large association group, right, of respondents, because annual meetings are like central to association work. It's sort of here at PCMA, it's like the capstone of the association's work. So it is surprising to hear that there still is that undercurrent of feeling like their work is not valued by leadership. So there's that. And then there are other people who just love the job just because it gives them the capacity to do so much and to get involved in education, to get involved in logistics, to think about design, to think about marketing to their audience. There's just such a rich job, right? So you saw a mix of those comments, and you also saw a lot of frustration about budgets and rising costs. And that, I think, if there was one thing you were to ask either of us, because you were very involved in the data analysis, it's this sense that the AV and food and beverage costs have risen significantly. You then have staff levels that are not at the same as pre-pandemic. So they're dealing either with fewer people on staff internally and or fewer people who they have worked with in the past as supplier partners. And I think a heightened expectation about what the experience is going to be like. I think that people, we lived through the pandemic. A lot of people got their education online or attended virtual events, and they recognize there's a big difference between interacting with people online and content online and being in person. And so they want the in person to really be in person. They want those networking opportunities to be a lot more than just throwing people in a room with food and music, loud music and drinks. They want it to be more intentional, and they want the content to be stellar, but they also want the opportunity to talk to each other about what they're learning, not just be a passive recipient. So you have all of these higher expectations on top of having smaller budgets, and I think that's just a recipe for frustration. What was the sense you got out of that, Maggie?
Yeah, very similar to you. And by the way, I have to say I've always loved this leading question, how are you feeling? Because it really speaks to the human side of the business, and it's not the focus of the logistics or, those heavy questions on budgets and business models and are you using AI or not? But how are you as a human being, as a event professional? How are you feeling?
Right.
And the same stood out to me. There was a mix. There are always these optimistic event planners that see the opportunity in this moment
Right.
because we're in this kind of a transition moment, but also I think it speaks to how we find people when they're completing the survey. So there was
That's
one,
true, right? Because today I feel really good about my job. Tomorrow, maybe not
yeah,
so much. So it is very much in the moment. Yeah.
yeah, there was this quote somebody said the event industry has become even more stressful post-pandemic. Yeah, absolutely. And there was another one saying, I wish leadership would see me more as an industry leader. So that speaks to me as very particular in the moment pain point that that person had, a struggle that they were experiencing,
Mhm.
or uncertainty about future budgets and timelines. Again, it's a general thing, but maybe the next day, if the client approved a better budget, maybe that sentiment would have been different. So it's always interesting to see the variety of answers that we get because it's an open-ended question. And
Right.
something that stood out to me also was the business model. So we saw after the pandemic and during the pandemic that event professionals really tried to look for new business models. All of a sudden, everything was disrupted. So they were very focused on, okay, what's the business model of tomorrow? And we saw it last year where
Right.
quite a few people were saying, yeah, we're changing our business model. We're looking at this. We're, disrupting the business. And this year it dropped quite a bit. So it was interesting to see how either event planners have found that business model that they were looking for and starting to work for them. And that's why we see this drop, or they're starting to feel back at where they were and they
Right.
feel again the comfort of more in person versus virtual. So we know how to do that. So we don't have to look into new business models.
And I think it's probably a mix of those and going back to just feeling understaffed, that it's really hard to, as somebody said, it's really hard to build the house when you're washing the windows. So if you are just really kind of scraping by doing what you need to do to have an event that meets certain standards, it's very hard to have the time or the luxury to rethink different aspects of it. That I think that's just reality.
Yeah. And in terms of the challenges and which expense was the one that, you know, weighted the most heavy on event planners' budgets, it's again food and beverage and audiovisual, like you mentioned.
Right.
And these two items have been on the top of the list, I think,
Forever. Yeah.
for quite a long time.
Right.
So I'm curious. And also we asked, where are you managing to cut expenses? And while the majority said that they can't,
Right.
there were quite a few that said food and beverage and audiovisual.
Right.
So how is this event looking? And we saw it later in comments that, their event planners are trying to organize events with less of those bells and whistles
Right. Fewer
and
bells and whistles, which again then speaks to, okay, well, if there's a heightened expectation for the experience and you're not delivering on those bells and whistles, right, with the kind of wow factor with AV or doing something different with food and beverage, you're not going to have a satisfied attendee. So, yeah, so you have to, it must be really difficult when you have such a tight budget to know where you're cutting the fat and where you're cutting into muscle. And I think that's a real struggle.
yeah, for sure. And somebody said that they're cutting even the all-day coffee.
Mm.
And I found that very interesting because I had years ago attended an event which was like that. There was no budget for having coffee all day. And the participants relied on coffee at the exhibition stands. So they did not care about the stand and what the stand was all about. They just cared about the coffee machine.
Yeah.
And lines formed for that coffee machine. And they got frustrated when, the coffee machine eventually got broken because it was not supposed to it was not a professional coffee machine. So
Right.
it turned to this a whole thing within the event that made no sense.
No, but they were probably angry at the exhibitor who was
Exactly.
like, it was just a perk of going there. It wasn't, weren't meant to be the only the only coffee station in the entire conference. So yeah, I guess it's good to do. I myself am guilty of going to a booth where they're doing specialty coffees, but I always remember who it is that's doing it, right? I think it has a halo effect, unless the coffee is definitely part of the destination identity, like Costa Rica or Hawaii or wherever. But yeah, so I think that's a real struggle, is budget cuts with AV food and beverage. I also think what we're seeing with, we definitely see that we're all back to face and fewer hybrid and digital events. And I think that's also a function of cost because it's expensive to produce hybrid events. And I also feel like, if all of your resources are now toward face-to-face events, you have fewer resources to create hybrid experiences or digital offerings. And that's sort of a shame that we've lost the benefit of digital events that we had during COVID, which was it became fairer and easier and more sustainable for people to participate, right? And they could come from wherever as long as they had a good Wi-Fi connection. And I think we've definitely lost that with the events that no longer have those components.
Yeah, and we've heard it also from the different PCMA regions and regional offices. I've heard it in a conversation with Flo, our managing director from APAC. She said that during the pandemic, of course, they had a lot of online webinars and virtual events,
Yeah.
which they canceled later on because people stopped showing up. And all of a sudden now the audience started to ask for them again. And they said,
Yeah.
why haven't you done that? And she was laughing. She said, well, we were not showing up, so I stopped,
Yeah.
offering them. But if you want them and you show up, we'll keep on having them.
Maybe it is offering those things, but also making them available on demand so that people can see them when it's not, they're not live, but they still want to have a chance to. And I know that I've done that. I'm guilty of registering for an event, not being able to go to an online event, but then hoping that they're going to send me a recording so I can listen later on. Because, we all get busy during the day and we have other demands on our time. But it is kind of surprising that nearly half said they're fully back to in-person events and there's no digital. That's 47%. I guess the good thing is that most of the people said their attendance at their face-to-face events are back to pre-pandemic levels. And that was not what was reported in a New York Times article several weeks ago, which kind of painted a picture of empty convention center halls and events that were no longer of interest to people. It really seemed like they were not in tune with the times because all of the research we did that was part of this forecast, where the meetings market survey was part of that, was just showing that there's such an increased interest in travel and leisure, you know, combining your conference trip with a family trip or exploring the destination on your own afterwards or before. So we've seen a real increase in that. And I think that just was even more so in 2023 and no, 2024 compared to 2023.
Yeah. And another interesting part of the survey was the use of AI, which we introduced as questions last year. I like the fact that we saw an increase in terms of event professionals using AI for their job. And also we saw, I think it was a little increase in terms of how many people thought that AI would actually transform and will become, not transform, but will become a crucial tool for the meeting planners in the next year. So yeah, I'm looking at the data. It's 71% compared to 68 last year. It's a small increase, but it's an increase.
Right.
And that's coming from people that now are a bit more familiar with the AI than they were last year. So
Mhm.
they're not as scared, let's say, of it.
Right.
And I think also even professionals realize that they need to learn it. So some upskilling is needed for staff members in order to adopt the tool. We're all learning it as we go because it's very new. There's no more of that conversation. Is AI going to replace us? Or, should we be afraid of it? Or now is how do I make best use of it to ease my job?
Right. Yeah. I saw that also, which is good. There's just more interest. It's interesting. I saw an article today about shadow AI, which is organizations that tell their employees they don't want them to use AI, but the employees are still doing it sort of on the sly. So I think they wouldn't want them to use AI if it's open AI, right? And where it's not closed off and where the data and the information is not secure. But I also think if organizations want their people to use AI, they can't just rely on them to experiment on their own. They should invest in training. They should invest in helping them take the courses and giving them the time to learn AI. It's great to experiment on your own, but if you really want consistent results from staff, you have to do some training.
Yeah, it's true. It's not as easy sometimes to figure out how to prompt correctly.
Right.
Speaking of experience.
Yeah. No, I give up too easily. I am just like, yeah, this is not what I was looking for. You obviously did not understand the mission. So but you need to keep refining your prompt and that also helps AI get better at its job. I think one of the other things I wanted to mention, which I felt good about because a lot of our reporting on other surveys have shown that sustainability has taken sort of a back seat when you think about all these other priorities that they have to deal with. And our survey showed that there's actually more interest and effort on sustainability. Like, I think one third created an internal sustainability policy. So that's really good that they're not just people aren't just relying on suppliers, right, to do everything for them. Although I spoke to the organizer of Green Build last week, and she said they rely really heavily on the destination and the convention center for their event because they have very ambitious goals, and you can't achieve those goals without a partner that's already there. So when they go to, and this was interesting also about including sustainability requirements in RFPs. So 60% say they include sustainability initiatives. And you can initially say, oh, okay, so they're just looking for them to take over and they will just have a naturally sustainable event by virtue of being held in that destination and that venue. But she said, but they have these conversations when they're looking at a destination, and if a venue says F&B, we're not there yet. We don't source locally. We go to sources beyond 20, 30 miles. She appreciates it and she says, okay, we're going to come back to you. But in order for them to meet their goals, they need to have partners that are already fully immersed in that world and can help them successfully meet their objectives.
Yeah. And on the other side of that coin, in terms of partnership, something that stood out to me was how many things were highlighted in the survey to show that event planners really needed that partnership. In some parts of the organizing process, they felt blindsided but by the other side. And that came up with the hidden fees or resort tacking on fees. And they felt that they were a bit tricked. And also with union and labor costs and some requirements from AV companies, again, planners were a bit feeling like they were a bit powerless. And I was thinking, yeah, I mean, you really rely on your partnerships in these moments, and these are partnerships built for many years. And all of a sudden, there's such they might look like small things, but they just kill the whole partnership and this whole process.
Yeah, and definitely, I think it's a matter of transparency, right? It's like the hidden
Yeah.
fees where it's not disclosed at the beginning, and then it's a gotcha moment, and that does nothing to build trust, right? Interestingly, when we asked what they're doing to help with the budgets, one of the big things they're doing is trying to be smarter about negotiating, right? So, like maybe going to their partners and having them disclose those fees so they know what kind of invoice they're going to get at the end. That's really important, right? So it's a matter of making sure your contracts are really sound and asking the right questions. So
Yeah.
I interviewed Alex Carter, who's one of the speakers at Convening Leaders, and she said the best thing to do when you're talking to your supplier partners is tell me. That's what she loves to say, tell me. So it'd be tell me about a really good experience you had with a meeting planner. Tell me about a really bad experience you had with a meeting planner. So they know what to avoid, right? And what to work towards.
Yeah. I'm definitely looking forward to her session. It's going to be very interesting. And I wanted to close with the outlook. So we asked the question, are you more worried or more excited about the future? And we also had the option of being both worried and excited. And there were mostly both worried
Yeah.
and excited, but I was happy to see that worried is the least one. So only 11% of people said they were only worried. And some of the quotes that stood out in terms of what worries you the most is this industry that I once found a gift is not going to attract a solid workforce to the future, was one of the answers that we had. And on the flip side, what excites you the most was the emergence of Gen Z as leaders in our industry. So I found it very interesting how we had all the sides.
Yeah.
So how people were focusing. Again, was it just the day that that they answered the survey, or was it their general outlook to the industry?
Well, it's that, and it's also that there are some statistics that show there are fewer young people entering our industry, and we kind of figure out why, which is the crazy hours, the demands, probably low pay in the beginning, but the opportunities, and I think the opportunities are great as we know, but also I think people are, if they're optimistic, they're excited to see what they bring, what the new generation brings to events and how they can help transform them. So you can have both at the same time. You're worried that there aren't going to be enough people interested in this industry, but at the same time, you're hopeful that the ones who do come in are going to really help transform it and make it more relevant for the new audiences.
Yeah. I'm thinking of the new class, 20 in their 20s, that were just announced. So there's the exciting part. What are they going to bring? And they've already made some changes to just, get on that list is not easy. I can
No,
say that from
as you
experience.
know,
Yeah.
right? As you know,
Took me
being a former 20 in their 20s alumni.
took me 2 tries to actually get in. It wasn't from the first try. So yeah, well, that's just a little bit more of the data that we had in the meetings market survey. It was really very thorough, and I just have to say thank you to everyone that took the time to fill it in and give us their insights, because it really helps us look into the future and see what maybe 2025 will bring to the industry.
Absolutely. Yeah, it gives us just a kind of a glimpse into where we are, right? And if we don't ask people these questions, we don't know. We just make a lot of assumptions. So I also want to echo that. I appreciate everyone who took the time to participate in the survey. And there will be more surveys, so please, please participate.
Yeah, we'll of course rethink them and try to make them more digestible. Let's put it this way.
Right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michelle, for the time and digging into the interesting data of the meetings market survey.
Thanks.
We want to thank our sponsor, Visit Phoenix. To learn more about them and the intriguing tagline, "The desert made us do it," go to visitphoenix.com/meetings. As usual, you'll find all the links in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, do give us a 5-star review and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For more industry insights, visit pcma.org/convene. Stay inspired, keep inspiring, and until next time.